Imagine this for a moment. A single night that quietly unfolded while the world slept, a night so extraordinary that it shattered every human idea of distance, time, and possibility. A night when the barriers between the seen and the unseen were lifted, not for a king or an angel, but for a servant of Allah who had been crushed by grief, rejection, and relentless hardship. This is not a legend, not poetry, and not metaphor. This is a real event decreed by Allah, recorded in the Quran, affirmed by authentic tradition, and carried across generations as one of the greatest signs ever given to humanity. Before we continue, thank you for being here with Islamic Insight. Tell us in the comments which country you are watching from, and if your heart finds peace in learning about Islam, consider subscribing so you never miss these reminders that strengthen faith and awaken the soul. Now listen carefully, because this night did not begin with honor and light, but with pain so heavy it seemed unbearable. The night of Isra and Miraj came at a time when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had reached the deepest valley of human sorrow. He had buried his beloved wife Khadija, the woman who believed in him when the world called him a liar, who stood beside him when revelation first shook his soul, and who gave him comfort when the weight of the message felt too heavy to carry. Soon after, he lost his uncle Abu Talib, his shield in a hostile society, the one whose presence alone restrained the cruelty of Quraysh. With their passing, the doors of mercy seemed to close from every direction. Mockery intensified, persecution escalated, and the path ahead appeared darker than ever. Then came Taif, a city he approached with hope, only to be met with stones, blood, and humiliation, chased out like a criminal while children laughed and men jeered. His feet bled, his heart ached, and yet his tongue prayed not for revenge, but for guidance. This was the emotional and spiritual landscape in which Allah chose to act. This is crucial to understand because Isra and Miraj were not a reward for ease, but a response to endurance, a divine declaration that Allah had never abandoned his messenger for a single moment. On that sacred night, while the streets of Mecca lay silent and hearts were unaware of what was about to unfold, the decree of Allah descended. The Quran opens this event with words that shake the soul. Glory be to the one who took his servant by night. Allah does not say his prophet nor his messenger, but his servant, reminding all of creation that the highest honor is servitude to the Creator. This journey was not a dream experienced in sleep, nor a vision of the heart alone. Authentic narrations confirm that it occurred with both body and soul, a reality so profound that it later became a test of faith itself. If this had been a dream, it would not have provoked mockery, denial, and disbelief. But this was real, and reality can be terrifying to those who fear what they cannot control. As the night unfolded, Angel Jibreel appeared, not as a bearer of verses this time, but as a guide to realms no human had ever crossed. Before the journey began, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, underwent a moment of divine preparation. His chest was opened, his heart removed, washed with the water of Zamzam, and filled with wisdom and faith. This was not because his heart lacked purity, but because the human heart, no matter how strong, must be fortified to witness the signs of Allah that lie beyond the limits of creation. What he was about to see would overwhelm the strongest soul if Allah did not prepare it himself. This moment alone tells us something powerful. Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear, and when he calls someone to something immense, he prepares them in ways unseen. Then came the means of the journey itself, a creation unlike anything known to humanity. Al-Buraq was brought forth, a radiant mount described as swift beyond imagination, placing its stride at the furthest point the eye could see. This was not a creature of fantasy, but a creation of Allah designed for a specific divine purpose. The Prophet mounted Al-Buraq, and with Angel Jibreel accompanying him, the journey known as Isra began. In a single night, he traveled from Al-Masjid al-Haram in Makkah to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, a distance that would take months by caravan through harsh desert terrain. This alone was enough to make the disbelievers laugh in disbelief the following morning, because their understanding of movement was chained to camels, roads, and time. But Allah is not bound by the laws He created. He suspends them, bends them, or replaces them whenever He wills. Along the way, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was shown signs and guided to places heavy with meaning. He stopped at locations connected to earlier prophets, praying there by the command of Angel Jibreel, linking this final message to the long chain of divine guidance that stretched back to the dawn of humanity. This was not a random route through the night sky. Every stop, every pause, and every sign carried meaning, reinforcing that Islam did not emerge in isolation, but as the culmination of all revelation. The journey itself was a lesson before the ascent even began, teaching that sacred history is interconnected and that truth does not contradict itself across generations. When the Prophet arrived at Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the sacred sanctuary in Jerusalem, the night reached a moment that few truly reflect upon deeply enough. Gathered there were the prophets of Allah from across time, men chosen, tested, rejected, and honored, each carrying a fragment of the same divine message. They stood together, and Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was commanded to lead them in prayer. This act was not symbolic theater. It was a declaration written into the fabric of reality. The final messenger was being affirmed as the leader of all prophets, and the message he carried was being affirmed as the completion of all that came before. In that single prayer, centuries of prophecy aligned behind one servant of Allah, confirming that guidance had reached its final form. This moment also carried a subtle yet powerful reminder for believers. Leadership in Islam is not dominance or status, but responsibility, humility, and service. The one who led the prophets was the same man who mended his own clothes, fed the poor, and walked humbly among the weak. Honor in the sight of Allah is not granted through power, but through obedience. And with that prayer completed, the stage was set for something even greater, a journey not across the earth, but beyond the heavens themselves, a journey that would redefine the relationship between Allah and the believers forever. When the prayer at Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was completed, the weight of what had just occurred settled gently but firmly upon the heart. This was not merely a gathering, and it was not a gesture of honor without meaning. Every prophet present had faced rejection, ridicule, exile, and pain. Each had carried the burden of calling people back to Allah in societies that resisted truth. Some were mocked, some were threatened, some were driven from their homes, and some were killed. And yet here they stood together, united not by time or place, but by the same divine mission. By leading them in prayer, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was not elevated above them in arrogance, but placed at the head of a long caravan of truth that stretched back to Adam. This was Allah declaring to the unseen and the seen that the final revelation was not a break from the past, but its completion. Every law, every moral command, every call to worship one God alone found its final clarity in this message. Al-Aqsa itself bore witness to this unity, a sacred land where prophets walked, prayed, and struggled long before, now hosting the closing chapter of divine guidance. This moment also carried a deep reassurance for the prophet himself. Only hours earlier, his heart had been heavy with the memory of rejection and loss. Now he stood surrounded by brothers in faith who understood his struggle better than anyone else could. He was not alone in his pain, and he was not unique in his trials. The path he walked had been walked before, and the outcome was always the same. Truth is resisted, but it is never defeated. Leadership in prayer did not remove his humanity or his coming hardships, but it affirmed that every tear, every insult, and every wound had meaning in the sight of Allah. It was as if the message was being whispered into his heart without words. Remain firm, because you stand where the greatest of my servants once stood. Then, without spectacle or delay, the journey moved forward. What followed was not across land, but upward, beyond the familiar sky that humans gaze at in wonder. This ascent, known as the Miraj, was not powered by force or speed alone, but by permission. The heavens are not open territory. They are guarded realms, layered by divine order, and nothing enters them without Allah's command. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, ascended with Angel Jibril, the first heaven was reached, and permission was sought. A voice asked who was there, and when the reply came, it was not enough to name the guide alone. The name of the one accompanying him was requested, and when it was answered, the gates were opened with honor. This pattern repeated itself at every level, teaching that rank in the sight of Allah is known, announced, and recognized in the unseen world. In the first heaven, the Prophet met Adam, the father of humanity. Adam welcomed him as a righteous son and a noble prophet, and around him were the souls of his descendants. When he looked toward one direction, he smiled, and when he looked toward another, he wept. These were the souls destined for paradise and hellfire, a reminder that every human life is known before it ever begins. The meeting was brief, but its meaning was vast. The journey that began with Adam now continued with the final messenger, linking the beginning and the end of human guidance in a single encounter. As the ascent continued into the second heaven, the Prophet met Yahya and Isa, cousins united not only by bloodline, but by struggle. Both had called their people to righteousness, and both faced betrayal and rejection. They greeted Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with warmth and prayer, acknowledging the truth of his mission. In the third heaven, Yusuf was encountered, described as having been given half of all beauty. Yet his story was not one of ease, but of betrayal by family, false accusation, imprisonment, and eventual honor. His presence was a silent reminder that beauty, character, and patience are often tested through suffering before they are crowned with dignity. In the fourth heaven stood Idris, a prophet known for his devotion and elevated station. His life was marked by constancy and perseverance, qualities that echo quietly but powerfully through generations. In the fifth heaven, Harun was met, beloved by his people, gentle in nature, yet firm in faith. His closeness to Musa and his role among the children of Israel reflected the importance of mercy alongside strength. Each greeting carried affirmation, not surprise. None of these prophets questioned who Muhammad was. They knew him, recognized him, and accepted him fully, because truth recognizes truth instantly. The sixth heaven brought an encounter that carried profound emotion. Musa welcomed the prophet with honor, yet wept after their meeting. When asked why he wept, Musa explained that the nation of Muhammad would enter paradise in greater numbers than his own. This was not jealousy, but deep concern and reflection, born from a lifetime of struggle with a difficult people. Musa's presence carried particular significance because his life mirrored many of the trials Muhammad would face. Opposition from one's own people, resistance to divine commands, and the heavy responsibility of leadership were threads that bound their stories together. Finally, the seventh heaven was reached, where Ibrahim was found leaning against Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur, the heavenly house visited daily by 70,000 angels who never return once they leave. So vast is the creation of Allah. Ibrahim welcomed Muhammad as a righteous son and a noble prophet, and this meeting carried a unique resonance. Ibrahim had built the Kaaba on earth, and here he was beside its counterpart in the heavens. The message was clear. The call to worship Allah alone that began with Ibrahim had now returned to its purest form through Muhammad. Beyond this point, creation reached its limit. Sidrat Al Muntaha stood as the boundary, a majestic lote tree marking where knowledge, decree, and command descend and ascend. Its description defies imagination. It was covered in colors no eye has seen, attended by angels beyond number. Here, Angel Jibril stopped. Despite his immense rank, he could not proceed further. To go beyond would mean annihilation by the overwhelming presence of divine command. But Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was invited forward, alone, in a manner befitting a servant honored by his Lord. What occurred beyond Sidrat Al Muntaha is described with restraint and humility. The Prophet saw signs of Allah so great that language cannot contain them. The Quran confirms that his heart did not lie about what it witnessed. There was no confusion, no doubt, and no exaggeration. This was not imagination. This was reality unveiled, measured carefully by Allah, shown only as much as the human heart could bear. It was here that closeness was granted without likeness, nearness without form, and honor without elevation beyond servitude. The ascent through the heavens was not meant to remove the Prophet from the struggles of earth, but to anchor him within them. He would return to mockery, hardship, and rejection, but he would return knowing with certainty that the heavens stood open above him. This journey taught that elevation is not achieved by escaping hardship, but by remaining obedient within it. And as the night continued, Allah prepared to bestow a gift upon the believers that would forever link the earth to the heavens, a gift born not from human request, but from divine mercy. As the ascent continued beyond the meetings with the prophets, the nature of what was being shown began to change. This part of the journey was not about recognition or greetings, but about unveiling reality itself. Allah chose to show his messenger scenes that most human beings will only encounter after death, not as abstract lessons, but as living truths. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was shown aspects of paradise and hellfire, not in vague symbolism, but in forms that carried clarity, consequence, and meaning. He saw people being punished in ways that reflected the sins they committed in the world. People who consumed the wealth of orphans unjustly, people who spread corruption with their tongues, people who neglected prayer and betrayed trust. These were not meant to satisfy curiosity or provoke fear alone. They were warnings rooted in justice, reminders that actions echo beyond the grave, and that Allah's system is precise, not random. At the same time, he witnessed scenes of unimaginable reward, gardens whose beauty no eye has seen, whose peace no heart has fully felt, where those who remained sincere and patient were being honored beyond anything they sacrificed on earth. These visions were balanced, neither despairing nor indulgent, teaching that Allah's mercy is vast, but his justice is real. What made these scenes even more striking was the calm clarity with which they were shown. There was no chaos, no confusion, no cruelty for its own sake. Everything existed in perfect order, every consequence matched to its cause. This alone shattered the illusion that life ends at death, or that morality is subjective. The unseen world was not distant or theoretical. It was structured, inhabited, and awaiting humanity. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, absorbed these realities not as a detached observer, but as a messenger who would soon return to warn and remind his people. He was being entrusted with knowledge that carried weight, responsibility, and urgency. Every word he would later speak about the hereafter would be grounded not in imagination, but in what he had seen with his own eyes by the permission of Allah. As the journey progressed, the magnitude of what lay ahead intensified. The Prophet was approaching the furthest boundary of creation, a place no human being had ever reached and no angel had crossed beyond. This was Sidrat Al Muntaha, the lote tree at the utmost limit. It was not simply a tree in the way the human mind understands trees. It marked the boundary where all knowledge of creation ends and where divine command begins. Everything that ascends from the world below stops there, and everything that descends from above passes through it. The Prophet described it as being covered in colors and forms that words could not contain, overwhelmed by beauty and majesty beyond description. Angels surrounded it in numbers impossible to comprehend, fulfilling commands without hesitation or fatigue. The atmosphere itself carried a gravity that silenced everything else. Here, Angel Jibril halted. Despite his immense rank, despite being the most honored of angels, despite accompanying the Prophet through every level of the heavens, he could not proceed further. He explained with humility that if he were to advance even the distance of a fingertip beyond this point, he would be consumed by the divine presence. This moment alone carries a lesson that echoes through eternity. No matter how exalted a creation may be, it remains a creation. Only Allah is beyond limits, beyond comparison, beyond reach. Yet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was invited to proceed. Not because he ceased to be human, and not because he shared in divinity, but because Allah chose to honor his servant in a way he had never honored anyone else before. What occurred beyond Sidrat Al Muntaha was described with restraint, dignity, and awe. The Prophet did not embellish, exaggerate, or speculate. He spoke only of what Allah permitted him to convey. The Quran itself confirms that the heart did not deny what it saw, nor did the sight transgress its limits. This is crucial. The experience was not overwhelming chaos or loss of consciousness. It was clarity without arrogance, closeness without likeness, honor without elevation beyond servitude. The Prophet remained fully aware of who he was, a servant standing before the signs of his Lord. He did not claim to see Allah in a form, nor did he describe essence, because Allah is beyond such description. Instead, he conveyed certainty, peace, and an unshakable conviction that what he experienced was real, deliberate, and measured by divine wisdom. This moment was not about spectacle. It was about confirmation. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was being strengthened at the core of his mission. He would return to a people who mocked, doubted, and rejected him, but after this night, doubt could never enter his heart. He had seen the outcome of belief and disbelief, the structure of the unseen world, and the reality of Allah's promise. His patience would no longer be sustained by hope alone, but by certainty. This was the difference between knowledge by hearing and knowledge by witnessing. And yet, even after being taken beyond time and space, he would return to live humbly among people, to endure hunger, insult, and hardship without claiming privilege. That contrast is part of the miracle itself. The presence at Sidrat Al Muntaha also carried a profound message for the believers who would come after him. No matter how far one ascends in faith, knowledge, or closeness to Allah, the foundation remains servitude. The greatest honor granted to the Prophet on that night was not a throne, not dominion, and not exemption from struggle, but nearness earned through obedience. This challenges every human tendency toward pride. Elevation in Islam is inward before it is outward, and closeness to Allah increases humility rather than ego. As the night unfolded at the edge of creation, Allah prepared to bestow something extraordinary, not only upon his messenger, but upon the entire community that would follow him. The journey through the heavens was not an isolated miracle meant only to amaze. It was a prelude to a gift that would permanently connect the believer on earth to the divine command above the heavens. And when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, would descend back toward the world, he would carry with him not stories for entertainment, but truths that would shape faith, worship, and purpose until the end of time. At the point where words fall short and creation reaches its limit, Allah bestowed a gift unlike any other gift given to any nation before. This was not a command delivered through an intermediary on earth, nor a ruling revealed gradually over time. This was a decree handed directly, beyond the heavens, in a place where no human voice had ever echoed before. The obligation of prayer was given here, not as a burden, but as an honor, a direct line between the believer and Allah that would never require distance, travel, or mediation. At first, the command was 50 prayers each day and night, 50 moments of standing before Allah, 50 invitations to step away from the noise of the world and return to purpose. This number was not given to overwhelm, but to demonstrate the value Allah places on prayer. It was as if Allah was declaring that nothing draws a servant closer, nothing purifies the soul, and nothing anchors the heart like prayer. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, began his descent, he encountered Musa once again. Musa asked what had been prescribed, and when he heard the number, his response was immediate, shaped by a lifetime of leading a difficult people. He advised the Prophet to return and ask for a reduction, explaining that the community would not be able to sustain it. This exchange is profound. It reveals not only Musa's wisdom and concern, but Allah's mercy unfolding in real time. The Prophet returned, and Allah reduced the number. This happened again and again, a dialogue rooted not in reluctance, but in compassion. Each return brought ease, until the obligation was reduced to 5 daily prayers. Yet Allah declared that the reward would remain as 50. The message was unmistakable. Allah desires consistency, not exhaustion. He seeks connection, not collapse. 5 prayers would become the heartbeat of faith, spaced throughout the day and night, structuring life itself around remembrance of the Creator. This moment forever changed the meaning of prayer. It was no longer simply an act of devotion. It became a daily Miraj for the believer, a moment where the soul rises above the distractions of the world and stands before Allah. Every bow, every prostration, every whispered verse carries the echo of that night beyond the heavens. Prayer was not given as a ritual confined to walls and schedules. It was given as a lifeline, and it is no coincidence that when faith weakens, prayer is often the first thing to slip away. Allah placed prayer at the center of Islam because it is the center of the believer's relationship with Him. With this gift secured, the journey turned back toward the world. The descent carried the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, once again through the heavens, past the prophets, past Sidrat Al Muntaha, back through the unseen realms toward the earth he had left only hours earlier. Yet he did not return unchanged. He returned, carrying certainty carved into his heart, clarity that no insult could shake, and strength that no hardship could extinguish. Before reaching Mecca, he witnessed signs along the way that would later become proof for those willing to listen. He saw caravans traveling through the desert, recognized their details, and would later describe them with accuracy that left no room for dismissal. These were not additions to convince skeptics. They were confirmations for those whose hearts were already open. By morning, the Prophet was back in Mecca. The same streets, the same houses, the same people who had mocked him the day before now stood before him again, unaware that the distance between the heavens and the earth had been crossed in a single night. When he spoke of what had occurred, disbelief spread quickly. The leaders of Quraysh seized the opportunity, laughing openly, rushing to Abu Bakr to test his loyalty. They expected hesitation, doubt, perhaps even retreat. Instead, Abu Bakr responded with words that would echo through history. If Muhammad said it, then it is true. In that moment, faith revealed its true nature. It was not built on what seemed reasonable to the mind, but on trust in Allah and His Messenger. This was why Abu Bakr earned the title as Siddiq, the one who affirms truth without hesitation. For many, that morning was a breaking point. Some who had claimed belief stepped back, unable to reconcile divine power with human limitation. Others stood firmer than ever, recognizing that faith had never been about comfort or convenience. Isra and Miraj became a filter, separating those who believed when belief was easy from those who believed when belief demanded trust beyond logic. And this too was part of Allah's wisdom. Truth does not force itself upon hearts that resist it. It reveals itself and allows sincerity to rise or fall on its own. The return to Makkah also carried a subtle but powerful lesson. Despite witnessing the wonders of the heavens, despite standing at the edge of creation, despite being honored in ways no human ever would again, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, returned to live simply. He did not claim privilege. He did not withdraw from society. He did not demand recognition. He resumed his mission with humility, patience, and perseverance. The night journey did not remove hardship from his life. It gave him the strength to endure it. This is the pattern of divine support. Allah does not always remove the storm, but He fortifies the one walking through it. From that day forward, the story of Isra and Miraj lived on, not as a distant miracle locked in the past, but as a living reality embedded into daily worship. Every call to prayer carries its legacy. Every time a believer turns toward prayer, they answer a summons that was first given beyond the heavens. The journey back to Makkah marked the return of the messenger to his people, but it also marked the beginning of a deeper connection between the believer and Allah, one that would endure until the final hour. The heavens had been opened, the path had been shown, and the gift had been delivered. What remained was for humanity to respond. What followed the return from that extraordinary night was not celebration, applause, or acceptance. It was a test, sharp and immediate, cutting through hearts with precision. By morning, the story of the night journey spread through Makkah, carried not with reverence, but with ridicule. The leaders of Quraysh sensed an opportunity. They knew the limits of their own understanding, and they assumed those limits applied to everyone else. How could a man travel from Makkah to Jerusalem and back in a single night, let alone ascend beyond the heavens? To them, it sounded like the perfect claim to expose what they believed was falsehood. They gathered people quickly, repeating the story with mocking laughter, exaggerating details to provoke doubt, waiting eagerly for believers to hesitate. This was never just about the journey. It was about trust. It was about whether faith would remain firm when belief demanded surrender beyond logic and habit. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was confronted, he did not retreat, soften his words, or reshape the truth to make it more acceptable. He described the journey with calm certainty, recounting details with clarity and consistency. He spoke of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, describing its structure so accurately that even his enemies were momentarily unsettled. He spoke of caravans he had seen along the way, of their locations and movements, details that would later be confirmed exactly as he said. These were not desperate attempts to prove himself. They were simply truths, stated as they were, because truth does not fear examination. Yet even with these signs, disbelief persisted. Because the real barrier was never evidence, it was pride. In that moment, faith revealed its true weight. Some who had claimed belief quietly withdrew, shaken by the demand this event placed on their trust. They wanted faith to fit comfortably within what they already accepted, not to stretch them beyond it. Others stood firmer than ever, and among them was Abu Bakr. When he heard the news, he did not ask for details, nor did he pause to calculate possibility. He said words that would define sincerity forever. If Muhammad said it, then it is true. That statement was not blind loyalty. It was recognition built on years of witnessing truth, integrity, and unwavering consistency. Abu Bakr understood something others did not. If Allah could reveal the Quran, if angels could descend with revelation, if creation itself was sustained by divine command, then a night journey beyond time and space was not extraordinary. It was simply Allah doing what Allah wills. This moment separated faith, rooted in convenience, from faith anchored in certainty. Isra and Miraj became a scale by which hearts were weighed. It taught that belief is not proven when everything makes sense, but when obedience remains, even when the mind struggles to grasp the unseen. This is why the night journey was not explained gradually, softened for acceptance, or delayed for readiness. It arrived suddenly, publicly, and unapologetically. Those meant to believe would believe. Those clinging to arrogance would turn away. And through this separation, the community of faith became stronger, purer, and more resilient. As days passed, the impact of the night journey continued to unfold quietly. It reshaped how believers understood hardship. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, had not been taken beyond the heavens to escape pain, but to endure it with clarity. His mission did not become easier after Isra and Miraj. Persecution continued. Hunger returned, threats intensified. Yet something fundamental had changed. The heavens were no longer distant or abstract. They were real, structured, and close. The unseen world was no longer a concept described only by revelation, it was a witnessed reality. This knowledge strengthened resolve in a way no argument ever could. For the believers, Isra and Miraj became a source of quiet resilience. When prayers were established, they were not seen as obligations imposed from above, but as invitations extended from beyond the heavens. Every time a believer stood in prayer, they were answering a call that originated near Sidrat Al Muntaha. Every prostration became a reminder that the highest elevation comes through humility. Every struggle carried meaning because Allah had shown that relief does not always come through removal of hardship, but through closeness to Him within it. The journey also redefined the relationship between time and faith. Isra and Miraj proved that Allah is not bound by sequence or distance. What feels impossible within human calculation is effortless within divine will. This understanding reshaped how believers approached difficulty. Delays no longer meant denial. Silence no longer meant abandonment. Hardship no longer meant failure. The night journey taught that Allah's plans unfold beyond what eyes can see, and that moments of greatest darkness may be standing directly beside moments of greatest honor. As the years passed and Islam spread beyond Mecca, the memory of that night remained alive, not as folklore, but as foundation. When believers faced fear, they remembered that Allah took His servant beyond the heavens and returned him safely before dawn. When they faced doubt, they remembered that faith had already been tested and refined. When they faced exhaustion, they remembered that prayer was given not to burden them, but to lift them. Isra and Miraj became woven into the rhythm of daily life, quietly shaping character, patience, and purpose. And beyond all lessons, beyond all miracles, the night journey left behind a single, enduring truth. Honor does not come from escape, power, or recognition. It comes from servitude. Allah described the Prophet as His servant at the very beginning of the journey, and He returned him to the world, still a servant, still humble, still walking among people with compassion and restraint. That is the final message of Isra and Miraj. No matter how high one is raised, the ground of humility must never be left behind. This was the night Allah took Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, beyond time and space, not to separate him from humanity, but to anchor him more deeply within it. A night that began in pain and ended in purpose. A journey that crossed the heavens, yet returned to the streets of Makkah. And a reminder that for every believer, the path upward is always open, not through flight or vision, but through sincere prayer, steadfast faith, and trust in Allah when the world offers none.